Hello there, Hollyshade Draws here. I'm here with my fursona Trïx in my first ever commentary video. So today I'm going to be talking about a bit of a delicate subject within the animation and art community. I'm going to be talking about tracers. For those of you who don't know what a tracer is somebody who takes somebody's art, not direct art theft, but they screenshot or take somebody's art piece, downloading it into their art program, trace over the line art itself with different line art, remove the image, and recolor or make some slight changes to the art. It's honestly not okay, and I'm going to get more into why that is later. Now, I've traced over some of my own art in the next frame so you can kind of see what it's all about. Here is a piece of art that I made and posted on my DeviantArt. It's of my OC Aviator. Now, I traced over it in my Adobe Draw art program, and in the next frame you're going to see the traced art. It looks incredibly similar to the first piece of art, as most traced art is, with some slight differences. And here's a piece of traced art. You can see the nose is different, maybe the eyes a little bit, but the line art is very poorly done, and you can tell that it's traced because it's basically an exact copy of the frame before it. So that's basically what most traced art looks like. However, not all traced art is an exact replica of the original piece. There are different kinds of traced art, or what I'd like to call tiers. Tier 1 is what you just saw, me trace over my own art. It's an exact replica of the original piece, maybe with like one change. Basically, it's the same thing, and there's no difference whatsoever. However, the second tier of art is very different from the first tier. It sometimes can be a bit more complex or more simple. Let me get into it. I'm only going over the basics here. There are many, many more layers and tiers and so many more types of traced art. But the second tier, in my opinion, is where the tracer only traced over a certain part of the original piece. For example, if it's a wolf, some part of the fur. It's normally unrecognizable. But it is still traced art nevertheless. I'm going to include some examples of this in the next frame. And here we go again with my OC Aviator. I've traced over it again, but much less noticeably, maybe just the nose or some part of the hair. Now, here's the traced art of Aviator that I created. Alright, here's the traced piece. Now, looking at it, some of you might say, oh, well, this is just pose theft. Trust me, it's not. See how it's still traced? See how the line art is still uneven? It might be opening its mouth, it might have different eyes, but overall, it's still basically the exact same piece of art. Now, this kind of overlaps with Tier 3, which I will explain in a minute. Here we go. But first, here's another piece of Tier 2 line art, just to kind of get you to know what you're looking at. It's, again, of Aviator, so same pose. This is not the best example, but it's all I have. Okay, let's get into Tier 3. Tier 3, some people might say, is basically its own piece of art. However, I must assure you that it's not. It kind of overlaps with Tier 2, in the sense that it's largely different from Tier 1, and normally is unrecognizable from the first piece of art, which is why most people get away with Tier 3 and sometimes Tier 2 tracing. I'm just going to quickly cover pose theft because some cases of pose theft are not valid. Somebody might accidentally draw in the same pose as you with a completely different character, completely different color scheme. This is not what I consider to be Tier 3 tracing. It's totally different. For example, if you make a standing pose or use a common pose, it's likely that another artist is going to accidentally use that pose. There are billions of artists in the world. Somebody's going to have to use the same pose as you. But Tier 3 tracing is totally different and not the same as pose theft. Now onto Tier 3 tracing. Again, not to be confused with pose theft or anything along those lines. I'm going to get more into it. Now, I can't provide any art examples for Tier 3 tracing because that obviously would help, but I feel like it should just be explained. Tier 3 tracing is when you take an art piece and trace over it using either the same line art or the same pose generally. It doesn't even have to be traced. I mean, obviously it is traced in some parts because that's what makes it tracing and not direct art theft, but most of the time, Tier 3 tracing often looks like a completely different image altogether, which is why it's the hardest type of tracing to spot. For example, if I took somebody's art, put it in my drawing program, and traced over a few lines, but made, I don't know, the pose or the setting or anything different, most tracing is just recoloring a different piece of art, so the pose or the setting would be different anyway. I could sit here and ramble about Tier 3 tracing for hours, but in essence, Tier 3 tracing is just when the traced piece of art looks so different from the original image that you can hardly tell that it's traced. You really have to look into it, which is why Tier 3 tracers normally have an actually successful tracing career, commissions that are traced, and a fan following, which is largely wrong, and that's why they're arguably the worst kind of tracers in the art community and animation community. Let's recap. Tier 1 tracing is when the original image is traced over exactly, maybe with different colors or different backgrounds, but exact same image. Tier 2 tracing is when a few things are changed, like maybe the hair or the eyes, but it's in essence the same image. And Tier 3 tracing is when it's so unrecognizable that it looks like a different image, but it's normally the same and it's always traced. Now let's get into the next part of the video, which is where I talk about why tracing is bad and types of tracers. Why tracing is bad is pretty self-explanatory. Imagine if somebody took your art, posted it online, claimed it as their own, without crediting you whatsoever, and got likes and comments. Somebody said, wow, this is a great piece of art. Somebody else liked it. I mean, come on, that would upset you, right? Most people have been traced. And I can definitely guarantee you that everyone who gets traced does not feel good about it. It's art theft in essence. It's not stealing the exact piece of art and putting it on your page and saying, I drew this when it's the exact same piece of art, but it's as good as. I mean, it's tracing. Tracing is just grabbing somebody's art and just tracing over the line art. It's not good at all. I don't understand why people trace, genuinely. If any of you could tell me, please feel free. I mean, as opposed to gaining an amazing career with lots of love from fans and bettering yourself as a person and an artist, and gaining a great online persona, and many subscribers, even money from commissions, and just making an online presence. However, tracing will only gain you discovery of your tracing, hate because of that tracing, requests to take it down, and pain to the artist and the artist's fan following and everyone that you've traced and affected by it. I mean, tracing is terrible. Since I've been ranting about why I hate tracing and why tracing is bad in essence and causes the artist pain, the original artist of course, not the tracer, for the last minute and a half, I think it's time to get into the last part of the video. In this part of the video, I'll cover different types of tracers, from the novice tracer to tracers like the infamous Nad6969, ugh, I hated saying that, on DeviantArt, who had a tracing career for 12 years before their account was taken down, but I'm not going to cover them today. I'm going to start off with the first of the three tracers I'm going to cover. This one I like to call the novice tracer. They haven't been tracing for a long time, don't have a lot of fans, if any, and most of the time they only trace in like maps and stuff, which is honestly one of the worst kinds of tracing in my opinion, but I'm not going to cover that right now. Maybe I'll cover it later in the video if I've got time. They're normally a first tier tracer. Novice tracers, the first tier tracers, are normally kids they don't understand that tracing is wrong. They want to be like their idols on YouTube and other platforms. They just want to get better at drawing. They don't understand how wrong it is. Normally, I can let this slide. Now, these tracers, more often than not, completely panic when they're found out. Completely. I've dealt with a couple of tracers over the years myself, and they've all been novice tracers. All kids, 10 to 13 years old, hoping to, I don't know, improve their art, but not going about the right way to do it, insecure about their art skills. Now, I'm not saying that this is a good type of tracing, but when they're found out, honestly, they either create the weirdest lie known to man, or they just panic and freak out. They have 3 reactions in total, I've found, but here's the panic one. Oh my gosh, I'm crying. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to better myself as an artist. I'm so sorry. Don't sue me. I mean, with an overload of panicking, and honestly, sometimes I feel sorry for them. Now, the panickers, not knowing what they've done wrong and panicking as a result, and normally figuring out what they've done wrong a few months or even years later, depending on their age, take down their art, sometimes post an apology, most of the time just disappear into the abyss of the internet, never to be heard of again. Second, they make a weird story. Oh, I'm so sorry I got hacked, or it was my weird uncle. Stories aren't very believable, but most of the time, people either go along with them or say they don't believe the tracer. In any case, it doesn't really matter what the tracer's story is, because these storytellers normally take their art down, don't apologize though, they just disappear. I mean, if you can find me one tracer with a weird story that apologized and took their art down, I'd be shocked, appalled, amazed, flabbergasted. Now, the third reaction of these novice tracers isn't so great. Here it is in 3 words. I didn't trace. Or maybe not I didn't trace, but wow, you're accusing me. Or maybe the original artist is a tracer, kind of like the storytelling one, but mean, accusing, and never takes their art down. In any case, most novice tracers are pretty harmless, they're kids, and most of the time they take their art down. Now let's progress to the second level of tracing. Well, not exactly the level of tracing, the second level of tracers. The second level of tracers is the tracer that tries to use their art for exposure. Or, well, not their art, obviously, but their stolen art for exposure and commissions. And most of the time they actually do commission, which is why I call this one the commission tracer or the law-breaking tracer because it's technically illegal in most cases. I call them the law-breaking tracers because it's illegal to sell something copyrighted for a profit or reproduce it in any way online. Well, copyright laws do differ in many states and also outside of the US, and most copyright laws are different, and you can technically put something online if you don't claim it as your own, which is what all tracers do, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Most of the time, these law-breaking tracers, quote-unquote, take people's art, trace over it, it could be any tier of tracing, doesn't really matter, post it on their page and says, I made this art, adopts, commissions, sell, or puts it in their premium DeviantArt gallery, which most tracers, more often than not, do. Anyway, there is not much left to say about these law-breaking or commission tracers. Now let's get to the third and final type of tracer for today. A tracer that's had a long career. I call these tracers, well, they have many names. The boss tracers is my first one, which makes it sound like they are actually really good for something online, which is not true. So I'm just going to settle for calling them the OG tracers, mostly on DeviantArt and other platforms such as Instagram. These OG tracers, how can I put it simply? They suck. Most OG tracers have had careers for decades, maybe a decade. They've normally been stealing from the same artist, and they are most likely tier 3 tracers, which means that they hadn't gotten caught for a few years and decided to keep doing it. When they got called out, most of the time, these OG tracers did not acknowledge it or said that they traced, didn't credit the artist in any other trace pieces, and kept tracing. Now, most of the time, they've had DMCA notices filed against them on DeviantArt, but these were most of the time no use, such as NAD6969's case. Ugh, I still hate saying that. Oh my gosh, no. These tracers have no excuse, none. If they've been tracing for a few years, they're definitely not a kid anymore. They know what's wrong. They've been called out. And what do? They keep tracing. Most of the time, they're also commission tracers because they have made profit off their traced art. Most likely, they've been asked by the original artist to take the pieces down, but they don't. Because they disgust me. I'm sorry, but they do. They have no excuse. It's art theft, it's law breaking so much, and most of the time they just get away with it. They don't have lawsuits filed against them, they get away with it. Alright, well that concludes my video about tracers. I really hope you enjoyed. I hope that this gave you more information. And by the way, not all my information about tracers is accurate. These tiers were created by me, and just as a disclaimer, I mean, most of this information is not 100% reliable and what you should look for. But I explained the basics of tracers, the novice tracer. I mean, there are so many other layers of tracers and different types, as I mentioned earlier in the video, but this is basically the guidelines. Anyway, this is also my first time using sprites and using my fursona on this channel because this channel mostly focuses on warrior cats and my OC map parts. So I'm really glad to have used my fursona, and I'll make more commentary videos if you like this. Just let me know in the comments. Let me know if there's anything I got wrong. I will take any criticism. I know that this is not the greatest video. I know that I have a lot of errors. I know I talk fast, and I'm sorry if this video wasn't very understandable because I talk so fast, and I really need to stop doing that. Yeah. Anyway, wherever you are in the world, have an amazing rest of your morning, evening, afternoon, or night, and stay safe. Remember, be yourself. If you do art, you're amazing. Whatever you do, all your hobbies, feel valid. You are valid, you're accepted. And I'm sorry for taking up your time with this video, but I hope that this brought awareness to the subject of tracers, such as the novice tracer, the OG tracer, everyone. So, yeah. I just hope you enjoyed. There's really nothing left to say. Hollyshade Draws out. Bye.